The red and blue lights sliced through the dark like a blade. Harold Benton eased his black Lincoln to the shoulder of Highway 17, tires crunching against the gravel. The old man's hands steady slow rested on the steering wheel, exactly at 10 and 2. The habit was drilled into him decades ago, not from driving school, but from survival. He let out a quiet sigh, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. The cruiser door swung open, and a white cop stepped out, heavy-set, young, maybe 30. His name tag glinted in the glare of his flashlight. D. Reynolds. Harold had seen that look before, the swagger of someone who believed a badge was a license to command respect. Only this time, Reynolds didn't know who he'd pulled over. The old man's Lincoln looked immaculate, spotless, polished tinted windows. The kind of ride that said old money, not street hustle. But that didn't stop the suspicion flickering across Reynolds' face as he approached. He tapped his flashlight against the glass. Roll the window down, Harold did, slow and calm. Evening, officer. Reynolds leaned down, his flashlight tracing over Harold's brown face, the suit jacket, the tie. You know why I stopped you? Harold's voice was steady, smooth. I'm not sure, son. You tell me. Reynolds smirked. You were doing 58 in a 50 zone, speeding. The old man blinked, 2 miles over the limit. That's right, Reynolds snapped, license and registration. Harold moved slowly, careful like every black man who's lived long enough to understand how fear gets you killed. My wallet's in my breast pocket, he said. Registration's in the glove box. Reynolds' hand went to his holster. Keep your hands where I can see them. The chill in his voice didn't match the soft chirping of crickets in the night air. The flashlight beam trembled across Harold's hands. He'd been in courtrooms where men's lives hung in the balance. But this was a different kind of trial. Go ahead, Reynolds finally said, tight-jawed. Harold pulled the wallet out, placed it on the dash, then reached for the glove box and retrieved the registration. His movements were measured, deliberate, each one a silent act of self-defense. Reynolds snatched the documents from his hand, stepping back toward the cruiser. Stay in the car. The old man leaned back in his seat, staring straight ahead, the red and blue strobes reflecting in his glasses. He could almost hear his late wife's voice whispering from memory. You keep that calm, Harry. Don't give 'em nothin' to twist. He smiled faintly, even as anger bubbled quietly under the surface. It wasn't the stop that stung. It was the familiarity of it. Decades of dignity couldn't erase the suspicion that came with the color of his skin. 5 minutes later, the cop came back angrier, chest puffed. You got something to say about this, Mr. Benton? He asked. About what? Harold replied evenly. About your plates coming back mismatched to another vehicle. Says here this car's registered to a federal employee. That's correct, Harold said. I am one. Reynolds scoffed. Yeah, what kind of federal employee you supposed to be? You packing government mail or what? Harold studied him quietly. No, officer. I don't deliver mail. Reynolds chuckled. You don't look like no Fed. You look like somebody's granddaddy borrowing a car he don't own. The silence that followed was heavy. I own the car, Harold said. Reynolds stepped closer again, his flashlight moving over the back seat, the front dashboard. Mind if I take a look inside? I do mind, Harold said calmly. You don't have probable cause. That single sentence changed the cop's tone. Reynolds' jaw tightened. The old man had said those words like he'd said them 1,000 times. Not nervous, not hesitant, confident, legally perfect. You some kinda lawyer or something? Reynolds barked. Harold's lips curved slightly. Or something. Reynolds yanked the door handle. Step outta the vehicle. Harold didn't move. On what grounds? Reynolds leaned in, his breath sour with coffee and ego. You don't get to ask me questions, but step out now, before I pull you out myself. The old man exhaled slowly, like a storm gathering behind his ribs. He'd been a lawyer before most of these small-town officers were born. He'd argued cases in front of men twice Reynolds' age, twice his arrogance. But he also knew how easily a headline could turn into a tragedy. Elderly black man resists arrest shot during traffic stop. He unbuckled his seatbelt, his voice low. Son, you're making a mistake. Reynolds grabbed his arm roughly, yanking him out. Harold stumbled slightly, catching himself on the car door. Don't touch me like that, he said sharply. Reynolds smirked. I'll touch you however I need to. You people don't get to tell me what to do. For a split second, the night went still. The cicadas hushed, the air thickened. And something in Harold Benton's gaze changed, an old steel flickering behind his eyes. Something carved from 50 years of surviving America's justice system from both sides of the bench. He straightened his jacket, met the cop's glare, and said in a voice so calm it cut like glass, You sure you want to keep talking like that, Officer Reynolds? The younger man frowned, thrown off. What's that supposed to mean? Harold didn't answer. He just stood there, dignified, silent, the kind of silence that made men nervous. The radio on Reynolds' shoulder crackled. Unit 7, you got a situation out there. Dispatch says the license plate matches a government fleet vehicle. You confirm. Reynolds hit the button. Yeah, I got it under control. Just some old man trying to be slick. The voice came back, firmer now. Copy that, but double-check the name. Says here it's registered to a Supreme Court official. Reynolds froze. He looked back at the old man, who was calmly brushing imaginary dust off his sleeve, watching him with quiet eyes. What did you say your name was again? Reynolds asked, his tone shaky now. Harold looked him dead in the eye. Justice Harold Benton, United States Supreme Court. The night swallowed every sound for a long, electric second. The crickets started up again. The wind rustled the trees. And for the first time since he'd stepped out of his car, the old man smiled. The wind howled softly through the trees lining the highway. Officer Reynolds just stood there, flashlight shaking slightly in his hand, pulse drumming in his ears. J. Justice Benton, he stammered, like his tongue had forgotten how to move. The old man didn't blink. That's right. For a long, awkward second, the world tilted. The cop's posture deflated, all that authority draining out of him like air from a punctured tire. He took one step back, then another. I didn't realize, he began, but the words fell flat. Harold's voice was calm, measured. You didn't need to realize, you just needed to respect. The younger man swallowed hard. His flashlight wavered, beam dancing over the Lincoln's chrome. Sir, I thought you thought I didn't belong behind this car wheel, Harold said. His tone wasn't angry. It was worse, cold, surgical. You thought I was just another old black man out past curfew. The officer's throat bobbed as he swallowed again. The radio on his shoulder hissed quietly. Somewhere in the distance, another patrol car engine hummed closer, backup arriving. Sir, Reynolds tried again. Harold raised one palm slowly, silencing him. Son, save your breath. I've heard that apology in 1,000 courtrooms. It always sounds the same. The second cruiser pulled up behind them, dust swirling under its headlights. 2 more officers stepped out, a man and a woman. They looked from Reynolds to Harold, confused by the tension. Everything all right here? The female officer called out, her voice sharp and professional. Reynolds hesitated. Yeah, just a misunderstanding. Harold adjusted his cufflinks, then turned slightly, his posture straight as a blade. No misunderstanding, officer. Just a lesson in restraint. The female cop frowned, stepping closer. Sir, are you? Reynolds cut her off. He's, Justice Harold Benton, Supreme Court. Her eyebrows shot up. You could have heard a pin drop on that highway. The second officer, a burly white guy named Lopez, according to his badge, looked at Reynolds like he'd just confessed to kicking a hornet's nest. You're kidding. Harold gave a faint chuckle. I wish he were. The female officer straightened immediately, her tone shifting to respectful. Your Honor, I apologize deeply for Harold held up a hand again. Don't apologize for him, officer. Let the man own his mistake. Reynolds' face flushed red under the strobing lights. The arrogance that had filled his chest minutes ago was gone, replaced by something smaller. Raw fear. I didn't mean any disrespect, sir, he mumbled, his voice shaky. Just following procedure. Procedure, Harold repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. Tell me, son, which part of procedure was grabbing me by the arm, or calling me you people? Reynolds' jaw tightened. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. That's what I thought, Harold said. He adjusted his jacket again, looking him dead in the eyes. You see, I've spent 50 years defending the Constitution you swore to uphold. 50 years watching men just like you forget that a badge docentee make you better. It makes you accountable. The backup officers shifted awkwardly. Lopez lowered his head. The woman cleared her throat. Sir, would you like us to file a report? No, Harold said softly. Not tonight. Reynolds blinked, confused. You're not pressing charges. Harold's eyes glinted behind his glasses. Oh, I didn't say that. The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Then Harold turned away, walking back toward his Lincoln, slow and steady. Each step sounded like a verdict. He opened the door, paused, and glanced back over his shoulder. You'll hear from my clerk in the morning. Have a good night, Officer Reynolds. The judge slipped into his car and closed the door with quiet finality. The Lincoln's engine purred to life. The headlights lit the road like twin halos as he drove off into the night, leaving 3 stunned officers standing in the dust. Later that night, Washington, D.C., the capital skyline, glowed like a constellation of ambition. Harold's apartment overlooked the mall, elegant, minimalist, silent, the kind of place that carried the quiet pride of a man who de-earned everything he had twice over. He set his briefcase down, loosened his tie, and sank into his leather chair. For the first time all night, his hands trembled, not from fear, but from fury restrained too long. He looked over at a framed photograph on the bookshelf, a young black soldier in uniform, his arm around a laughing woman, his father, 1963, never let M take your dignity, son, even if they try to take your life. Harold exhaled, eyes glassy. The words echoed like gospel. He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. A voice answered, calm, efficient. Chambers of Justice, Benton. This is Benton, he said quietly. I need you to contact the Department of Justice Oversight Office in the morning. Yes, sir, regarding... He paused, his jaw tightening. A police misconduct inquiry. Officer Daniel Reynolds. Highway Patrol, Georgia State. Find out everything. Yes, sir. He hung up. The clock ticked softly in the silence. Outside, the city buzzed, oblivious. But Harold Benton's night wasn't over. It had just begun. He reached into his desk drawer, pulling out a worn leather notebook. Inside were names, hundreds of them. Victims, cases, men and women who stood before him broken by the same system he sworn to make fair. He ran his hand over the first page, whispering under his breath, one more name, one more lesson. Then he turned off the lamp. The darkness didn't scare him. It never had. By sunrise, the story had already started to leak. Somewhere between the Georgia Highway Patrol's dispatch logs and a nosy intern with too much curiosity, the words Justice Benton and racial profiling had found their way into a journalist's inbox. By 10 a.m., it was everywhere. Breaking news. Supreme Court Justice pulled over by Georgia officer in racial profiling incident. Cable news anchors said the words with careful neutrality, but the tension behind their voices told the real story. Clips of Harold Benton's past cases began to circulate, rulings on police reform, civil rights protections, sentencing disparities. Every network wanted a statement. Every lawmaker wanted distance. But Justice Benton said nothing. He sat in his chambers, robe folded neatly across the back of his chair, eyes scanning the reports on his desk, photos of the incident. Dashcam stills. Officer Reynolds' body cam footage, the one thing Reynolds had been too stupid to delete. The video was clear, a man doing nothing wrong, being dragged out of his car like a suspect in his own country. Benton clicked, the file closed. His reflection in the dark screen looked older than he felt. Tired, but not beaten. Never beaten. His clerk, Mia, stepped into the office, clutching a tablet. Sir, CNN, Fox, and The Times have all requested interviews. They're calling it the Benton incident. He smiled faintly. Of course they are. America loves a name for its shame. Do you want to respond? She asked. He leaned back, fingers steepled. Not yet, but the public's emotional, he interrupted gently. I'm strategic. Mia hesitated, then nodded. She knew better than to press. The man had the patience of a saint and the precision of a scalpel. Whatever he was planning, it wouldn't be loud. It would be surgical. Meanwhile, Georgia State Patrol Headquarters Officer Daniel Reynolds sat alone in an interrogation room. No window, just fluorescent light, a steel table, and the heavy sound of his own breathing. His badge lay on the table in front of him, suspended, pending investigation. His supervisor, Captain Holt, stood on the other side, arms crossed. You really pulled over a Supreme Court justice? Holt asked, his voice dripping disbelief. Reynolds ran a hand through his hair. I didn't know who he was, okay? I thought he was what? Holt snapped a threat. Because he was driving a Lincoln in a suit. Reynolds looked up, guilt flashing in his eyes. He didn't look. Stop right there, Holt barked. Don't finish that sentence. You've dug yourself deep enough. Reynolds slumped. So what happens now? What happens, Holt said, pacing, is that the Department of Justice just called me. There's gonna be a full internal review, a federal inquiry, and probably a press conference. You might want to start polishing your resume, son. Reynolds' mouth went dry. He's gonna ruin me. Holt shot him a cold stare. He doesn't have to ruin you. You did that yourself. Washington later that week, a congressional hearing room buzzed with tension. Reporters filled the back row, cameras flashing like fireworks. Justice Harold Benton sat at the witness table, immaculate as ever, surrounded by microphones. He wasn't there as a judge today. He was there as a citizen. A senator cleared his throat. Justice Benton, thank you for agreeing to testify. We understand this must be a difficult moment. Harold nodded. Difficult isn't new to me, Senator. Laughter rippled softly across the room, the kind of laughter born from respect. The senator continued, We've seen the footage. It's disturbing. But what do you think it means, coming from someone in your position? Harold leaned forward. His voice, calm but sharp, carried through the hall like gospel. It means, he said, that the system doesn't care who you are, that a black man can wear a robe of justice one day and still be seen as a suspect the next. It means that our problem isn't just bad apples. It's the orchard. Silence followed. Every camera light blinked red, recording history. He continued, eyes locked on the panel. I don't want vengeance. I want accountability. I've lived long enough to know that humiliation changes nothing. Policy does. The senator nodded slowly. And what do you propose? Mandatory bias re-education for all state officers, Benton said. Federal oversight of racial profiling incidents. And maybe his gaze hardened slightly, a reminder that power without empathy is tyranny in disguise. The room broke into quiet applause. Even some of the reporters clapped, which was technically against protocol. Mia, watching from the side, smiled. She'd seen that same tone in court, that calm, surgical voice that cut deeper than anger ever could. Later that night, the cops' reckoning. Reynolds sat in his small apartment, TV off, phone silent. His name was everywhere. Social media, late-night monologues, hashtags trending. Hashtag Justice for Benton. Hashtag Reynolds resigns. Hashtag Driving while black. He hadn't slept in 3 nights. The department had suspended him indefinitely. His fiancée had stopped answering his calls. The world had shrunk to a single point of shame. He stared at his reflection in the dark TV screen. The same man, same face, but no badge, no swagger. Just a man who'd finally seen what it felt like to be powerless. There was a knock at the door. He opened it slowly and froze. Justice Benton stood there. Plain clothes, no entourage, no camera crew, just him. Reynolds stammered, how did you? Your captain gave me your address. Benton said quietly, I asked for it. Reynolds swallowed hard. If you're here too, I'm not here to destroy you, Benton interrupted. I came to understand you. Reynolds blinked. Understand me. People fear what they don't understand, Benton said softly. And you, Officer Reynolds, fear what you were taught to. The cop's eyes dropped to the floor. You don't know how I was raised. I know enough, Benton said. I've met your kind before. Good hearts, poisoned minds. Reynolds looked up, his voice cracking. I didn't mean for it to go that way. I thought you thought wrong, Benton said simply. And now you're living in the consequences. He turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. You're not the first to make that mistake, son, but you could be the last to repeat it. Then he left quietly, completely leaving the younger man standing in his own silence. Meanwhile, Supreme Court Chambers MIA walked in the next morning with a folder. Sir, the DOJ's launched an investigation into the department. Civil rights groups are pushing for your proposed reforms. It's moving fast. Harold looked out the window at the city below, sunlight bouncing off marble and steel. He said softly, Justice isn't vengeance, it's correction. She smiled faintly. You really think one man can change it? He looked at her, the old fire in his eyes again. I don't need to change it all. I just need to make them think twice before pulling the next black man over. He turned back to his desk, pen in hand, signing a new motion, a new beginning. Outside, the city hummed, but for the first time in a long time, it sounded a little more just. The fall air in Washington carried a strange kind of chill, not from the cold, but from tension. 3 weeks had passed since the traffic stop that changed everything, and America was still talking about it. Podcasts, protests, opinion pieces, everyone had something to say. But Justice Harold Benton, as usual, said nothing until now. Scene 1. The summit. The auditorium of Howard University was packed. Wall-to-wall students, journalists, and activists squeezed into every seat. A banner stretched across the stage, a conversation on race, law, and accountability. When Harold Benton stepped up to the podium, the crowd rose to its feet. He didn't smile. He never did when the truth was about to cut deep. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the room. He began, "When I was 12, I watched my father get stopped by a sheriff for walking home with groceries. They called it a routine question, but what they really meant was, 'You don't belong here.'" The room fell silent. He continued, voice steady, deliberate. 56 years later, a man with a badge said the same thing to me, only this time I was driving home from work. My work being the highest court in the land. He paused. The audience leaned in. That night, I realized something. No matter how far we rise, no matter what titles we earn, some people still see the robe, the degree, the medals, and only see color. He leaned on the podium, his gaze fierce. And that, my friends, is why justice must not only be blind, it must be honest. Applause thundered through the hall, but Harold's face didn't soften. He wasn't here for praise. He was here to plant truth like dynamite. Scene 2, the cop's trial in Georgia. Officer Daniel Reynolds sat in a courtroom that smelled faintly of disinfectant and regret. His badge stripped, his gun surrendered. Now it was his turn to face judgment. The prosecutor's voice echoed through the chamber. The charge is unlawful detention and violation of civil rights under color of authority. Reynolds barely heard it. His eyes were fixed on the back row, where Harold Benton sat silently, dressed in a gray suit instead of his robe. When the prosecutor called him to the stand, the room stilled. The bailiff's voice carried like thunder. Justice Harold Benton, every head turned. Benton walked up with quiet authority, his steps measured, unhurried. He took the oath, then faced the courtroom. "Justice Benton," the prosecutor began, "can you recount the events of September 3rd? Benton's voice was calm, precise. "Yes, I was stopped without cause. I was handled without respect, and I was spoken to as though my humanity was optional." The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, with all due respect, my client had no idea. That's the point," Benton interrupted softly. "He didn't know, and he didn't care to, because the color of my skin answered every question his training should have asked." Gasps murmured through the courtroom. The judge allowed the silence to sit before nodding. "Continue, Justice Benton. I'm not here to ruin a man's life. Benton said, turning slightly toward Reynolds. I'm here so this court understands the cost of assumption. Every routine stop that turns hostile chips away at the Constitution. One humiliation at a time. His voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from truth that had waited too long to be spoken. I've seen what this does to our country. I've buried friends who didn't make it home from routine stops. I've watched mothers collapse in courtrooms because justice came too late. I refuse to let that be their legacy. Or mine. When he stepped down, even the judge's gavel sounded softer. Reynolds never raised his head. Tears blurred the badge-shaped tan line still visible on his chest. Scene 3, the visit weeks later, in a small community center outside Atlanta, Harold Benton arrived quietly. No cameras, no press. Just him. Reynolds was there, sweeping the floor, wearing a volunteer's badge. He'd been sentenced to community service, diversity training, and a probationary period. It wasn't prison, but it was a sentence of humility. When Benton approached, Reynolds stopped mid-sweep. "Sir," he said, voice hoarse. "I didn't think you'd come here," Benton finished. "I told you, I'm not here to destroy you." Reynolds nodded slowly. "Still, I don't deserve your forgiveness." Benton studied him quietly. "Forgiveness isn't the point. Awareness is." Reynolds looked down. "I see it now. I see how wrong I was." Benton took a breath. "Seeing is the first step. Changing is the second. Teaching is the third." Reynolds frowned. "Teaching. You'll speak at the academy next month," Benton said simply. "Tell them what you told me. Tell them what it's like to see the world through the wrong lens, and then take it off." Reynolds blinked. "You're serious, dead serious," Benton said. "Redemption isn't silent, son. It's loud." He turned to leave, then added, "Make your noise count." Scene 4, the legacy. A year later, the world had moved on, but the movement hadn't. In classrooms, cadet programs, and law seminars. One case became mandatory study material. The Benton traffic stop. Footage from that night now played in training rooms across the country. Not to shame, but to teach. Not to divide, but to remind. And in every room where it played, a single quote was written beneath the screen, the same one Benton had said at Howard that night: "Justice must not only be blind, it must be honest." Epilogue. 1 year later, Harold Benton sat alone on a park bench near the Lincoln Memorial. Morning sun glinted off the water. Joggers passed. Kids laughed. Pigeons squabbled. The world felt lighter. A young black boy in a school uniform walked by, holding his mother's hand. He stopped, staring at Benton. "Hey, aren't you that judge from the news?" Benton smiled faintly. "I suppose I am." The boy grinned. "My teacher showed us your video. Said you taught America a lesson." Benton chuckled. "Did you learn it?" The boy nodded seriously. "Yeah. She said being brave don't always mean fitting. Sometimes it means staying calm." The old man's smile widened, soft, proud. "Your teacher's a wise woman." The boy waved and walked off. Benton sat there for a moment, the wind rustling his coat. He looked up at the monument, a stone man who once written that all men are created equal, and whispered quietly, "We're still trying, Abe, but we're getting closer." Then he stood, cane tapping gently against the path, and walked toward the sunrise.